Since sleep escapes you tonight, I'll take you on a journey across time, back to the distant brilliance of the Tang Dynasty. If this story relaxed you in any way, consider liking, sharing, or subscribing to our channel. Let us become a recurring presence in your nights, as familiar as a dream. Now let the lights dim. Let your room slip into gentle darkness. Pull the covers over yourself. Feel their softness enveloping your body. Deep breath. Close your eyes. It's time to slip into a dream, stretching back over 1,000 years. Here we are at the end of the 7th century in the Tang Dynasty, an age later praised as China's golden era. You have just passed layer upon layer of selection and examinations, and finally entered the palace as the lowest ranking attendant, assigned to the very heart of imperial power, the Da Ming Palace of Luoyang, the divine capital. Before stepping through those yearing vermilion gates, your life belonged to another world, the great city of Luoyang. As the eastern capital of the Tang, Luoyang's prestige ranked only beneath Chang'an, the official capital, much like Shanghai's relation to Beijing today. Luoyang sat at the core of the Central Plains. Its rivers and canals branched in every direction, linking the city through the Grand Canal to the fertile lands of Jiangnan, the plains of the north, and countless other cities. It was the most important transport hub in China, as the eastern starting point of the Silk Road. Luoyang was then the most prosperous metropolis in the world. It held a population of more than 1 million. Alongside the Chinese, countless peoples from far western kingdoms lived here too, bringing with them their cultures, their languages, their treasures. When Wu Zetian, the first and only empress regnant of China, rose to the throne, Luoyang reached its height, elevated to the divine title of Shendu, the capital of the gods. And you were born into this dazzling city, this living scroll painting of color and life. From childhood, your eyes grew accustomed to wonders on its streets. Merchants from the Persian Empire led camels swaying under rolls of patterned carpets, and chests filled with gold, silver, and jewels. The air around them always carried a foreign spice. Arab traders cradled fine ceramic vases, holding up round glass lenses rimmed with gold. Magnifiers, they called them. They peered closely at the painted patterns, bargaining with locals in heavy accented Chinese. Roman merchants passed copper and silver coins between their fingers, flat, round, stamped with faint human portraits. They called these coins currency. Monks from India walked in robes embroidered with red and gold thread, faces serene, steps solemn. Even pale-skinned Jewish merchants and Nestorian missionaries had found a place here, their lives woven into this great city's fabric. The blend of cultures fascinated you, but what you could never look away from were the Tang women, those free, proud, radiant figures drifting like blossoms across the streets in this flourishing dynasty, especially after Zetian became empress. Women's place in society reached its highest point in Chinese history. They were no longer shy figures, locked away in inner chambers, nor bound to the narrow ideal of thinness. Fullness itself was beauty, a mark of elegance and nobility. They wore grand, low-necked Rukan gowns, draped in translucent silken shawls that hinted at the body beneath. Skirts flowed like clouds around them as they walked freely, laughing, speaking, entering and leaving shops without fear or restraint. Some young women even preferred dressing as men, wearing loose male robes, pinning their hair into simple top knots, discarding jeweled ornaments for a single hairpin, riding horseback down the wide streets. They let themselves be carried by freedom and the wind. Zetian herself was such a woman. It is said that when she first entered the palace, she often disguised herself in men's attire, racing horses and playing polo alongside the emperor and the princes. She was a master of polo, guiding her horse with one hand, while leaning gracefully from the saddle with the other, striking the rolling ball with her mallet in perfect command. Even emperors and princes were said to be no match for her. Other women delighted in foreign fashions, some dressed like sensuous Persian ladies, some in flowing white robes like Roman women, and some in the rugged attire of steppe nomads. They befriended foreign merchants, learned their languages, shared their customs, and in turn taught them about China. Tang women were changeable, fascinating, magnetic, and Tang men matched them, refined, flamboyant, unrestrained. In this most open of China's dynasties, a man might don armor and train for war in the morning, and by night let his long hair fall loose as he drank wine, sang poetry, and debated philosophy. You could see groups of men drinking together, or women alone, or mixed gatherings of men and women, even men with flowers in their hair, drinking with women dressed as men, arguing literature, ethics, politics, laughing, sometimes even falling in love. Yes, this is not fantasy, but a dynasty recorded in history. Even what modern Asian societies might still hesitate to openly embrace, bisexual love, same-sex love, found space to flourish in Tang China. All of Luoyang seemed to live each day in this atmosphere, confident, open, interwoven, and at times indulgent to excess. Yet the moment you follow the elder eunuch, heart trembling, and step over the towering threshold into the Deish Ming Palace, the world changes instantly with a single thunderous clang, the heavy wooden bolt slamming into place, the gates close behind you, the noise of the outside world, that constant hum of Luoyang's streets, vanishes in an instant, cut off as though by a blade. You step into a vacuum. Silence presses against your ears. It is an ancient silence, solemn, suffocating, steeped in mystery. The air smells of rare incense, mingled with the warm, resinous scent of palace timbers. You follow the eunuch's shuffling figure, and the only sounds are the light fall of his steps and your own echoing against smooth stone floors. He leads you swiftly and surely through halls of dazzling magnificence. You want to lift your head, to look, yet you do not dare. Your eyes fix instead on the swaying hem of his robe as it brushes the stone all around. The unnatural stillness reminds you your life is no longer your own. The eunuch's words at the gate still echo in your mind. Remember, new one. Keep your eyes sharp and your mouth shut. Walk at the edge. The center path is for the Son of Heaven and the mistresses of the palace. Never cross through the middle of a gate. You must take the side. Otherwise, it is an insult to the throne itself. He paused then, his voice calm, yet edged with iron. And another thing, never make a sound unless permitted. I once saw a foolish one. He coughed just once before a noble. He lost a month's pay. Others were beaten. Remember this. We are slaves. We are always slaves. If you make a mistake, no one will save you. Those words press your gaze lower until your eyes hardly dare rise above the floor, and already your thoughts drift back to the home you may never see again. For even in the wealth of Luoyang, families like yours were common, simple, powerless, surviving on the edges of splendor. The brilliance of the city, the lanterns, the trade, the endless marvels, was to you like a shadow play, dazzling, vivid, yet untouchable, a dream made of paper and light. Your parents died young. Your brother tried his hand at trade, but after marriage, his wife, harsh and calculating, refused to waste coin on you and your elder sister. She feared the burden of preparing 2 dowries, and she found her solution. She sold you. The money bought your sister's dowry instead, marrying her off. Your brother allowed it. Eldest brothers are like fathers, and even in the tongue, girls like you had no voice. he at least tried to balance the cruelty. He made certain your sister's husband was decent, an ordinary man, but honest, and she would live as a proper wife, not a concubine. For a girl without parents, this was already considered fortune. As for you, he found a broker, an agent who worked for eunuchs, who purchased servants for the palace. He bribed him heavily to ensure you were placed, reminding him that you were plain in skills, but obedient, and at least presentable in looks. So it was decided you were sold into service. You, swept suddenly into the very stage you had long watched from afar, swallowed whole by the endless theater of the royal court. At first, confusion overwhelmed you, but slowly you learned your tasks. Gradually, your eyes sharpened, and in the unnoticed details of palace life, you felt the truth strike you again and again, like cold water splashing your face. It was here you understood what slave truly meant. Here, even windows revealed hierarchy. They were not glass, fragile and scarce, but lattices of polished wood fitted with oiled paper or fine silk. In the grander halls, craftsmen sandwiched sheets of silk or paper between two identical lattices of carved wood, forming delicate, double-layered screens. In winter, they blocked the wind. In summer, they breathed with light. Sunlight through these windows spread evenly. Across vermilion beams, gilded decorations, and polished white jade floors, soft, golden, luxurious. In chambers of high-ranking concubines or imperial sons, even the window silk might be tinted faint hues, so that the sunlight itself became colored, painting the room in light shades of ruby, emerald, or sapphire. Silk and paper, treasures in a common household, here used in walls, in sheets, in bulk, merely to filter the light. Even pillows told you what you were. You were never permitted soft cotton. Instead, you rested your head on hard ceramic or wooden pillows, flat, unyielding, carved to hold the shape of your skull. Why? Because hair was everything. Your hair, twisted into tall and intricate coils, could take hours to arrange. A ruined hairstyle was not merely inconvenience. It was a fault. If your bun sagged, if your braids loosened, if you appeared before your mistress unkempt, the punishment could be severe. Even cleanliness meant something different here. Every person of rank carried fragrance, not heavy perfume, but something subtler, finer. You noticed small silver spheres at their waists, swinging lightly as they walked. From them drifted whispers of scent, aloes wood, sandalwood, sometimes the rare and oceanic musk of ambergris. This was called inxiang, fragrance imbued into cloth, sewn into sachets, infused into bath water, into bed curtains, never overwhelming, but soft, lingering, natural. To nobles, it was elegance, but for you, it was a threat. The sweat of labor clung to your body. It was considered filth, something intolerable, so you scrubbed yourself with soapberry until your skin stung, terrified that any trace of odor might draw rebuke, or worse, the same scent that adorned their grace became for you a measure of survival. Even food was not merely food. Once you saw a boy eunuch punished for stealing crumbs, not even stealing, a noble woman's discarded pastry scraps, fished from the rayus in desperation after going unfed for a day. But the senior eunuch accused him of stealing and vulgar conduct unworthy of palace dignity. He was beaten until he fainted. You understood then. Food was no longer sustenance. It was power. It was reward. It was symbol. A master's leftovers were not to be touched, not even as trash. For a servant to eat them was not hunger. It was rebellion. From that moment, even the sight of untouched delicacies filled you not with longing, but fear. You had thought yourself stepping into a grand play, an audience to splendor, but you were no spectator. You were a shadow actor, nameless, voiceless, endlessly replaceable, and yet you endured. You built in your heart a small chamber, a quiet room where you locked away your grief, your bitterness, your longing. The habit had been formed long before, when your parents died, when your brother sold you, when your childhood ended before it began. So you tucked each wound away into that chamber, and you locked the door. You looked around at the glittering, suffocating prison that was the palace, then thought of Luoyang, alive with laughter, with horses, with color, and a chasm opened inside you. You began to wonder, was the tongue truly as golden as the books would one day write? Yes, there were women who rode horses, who played polo, who wore freedom like silk. But were they all women, or only the few? Historians still argue this, even now. Some say the tongue was indeed the age of women, the freest of all times. Others insist such freedoms were only for the elite, that for the many, for the common, for the forgotten. The chains of Confucian virtue still bound tight. As you looked at the silent, downcast faces of the palace maids around you, you felt your own answer stir. You breathed deeply. The air carried incense, wood, and the weight of power, and you knew, from the moment you entered those gates, your life was no longer yours. You must learn to watch, to hold silence, to survive in the most dazzling, yet the most dangerous place in the world. Your luck was not the worst. After months of menial work, your quick hands and quiet nature earned you transfer to a side hall near the Empress's own chambers And there, one evening, at a distance, but clear enough, you finally caught sight of her, the woman of legend, Zetian. The Empress should be over 60, nearing 70, yet from afar, her back remains straight. She wears the imperial yellow dragon robe, garments only an emperor may wear, and, surrounded by reverent officials, she ascends the palace steps. You have never seen any woman who, even before so many men of towering rank, still radiates such overwhelming, awe-inspiring force. When you are first reassigned to this post, you hear from elder attendants a blur of rumors, half true, half legend, about this empress. They say her life is a chronicle written with ambition and intelligence. At 14, she enters the palace. At first, merely a Chiron among Emperor Taizong Li Shimen's many concubines. Taizong gives her the name Wu Meinyang, meaning a woman bright and alluring, a name with a painfully shallow intent. After Taizong's death, in the year 649, she, a concubine without children, is sent to Ganyi Temple to take the tonsure as a nun. Everyone assumes that this once radiant woman will end her remaining years in quiet obscurity, like so many bright flowers before her. But she breaks that fate. Taizong's son, the newly enthroned Emperor Gaozong Liji, has long harbored love for her since his days as crown prince. After he ascends in 651, he defies the court's objections and brings Wu Meinyang back from the convent, making her his Jiaoyi, a high-ranking consort. All oppose it, all are stunned, and all assume the same thing. This woman is merely luckier than others, newly favored by the fresh-crowned emperor. Yet the story that follows, from Wu Meinyang to the Empress Wu Zetian, forces everyone in the palace to understand, and it has led modern historians who study her policies and records to near consensus. Gaozong Liji, whether as crown prince or as new emperor, could have had any beauty under heaven, and yet, while his father still lives, knowing it is taboo, he falls at first sight for a woman who once belonged to his father, his lesser mother by law. He stubbornly brings back this woman, already shaven as a nun, older than he, who served his father, and installs her as his consort. This is no mere accident, no matter how open the tongue may be. Even in the 21st century, such a thing, father and son sharing the same woman, cuts against moral codes, all the more in a feudal age, where such conduct could scar an emperor's reputation for generations. And by historians' later study, Gaozong is not an indulgent fool, nor a feeble wastrel, careless of judgment. Yet he does it anyway. This, indirectly, reveals that Wu Zetian's mastery over men is not luck or coincidence. What happens after Wu Zetian returns to the harem spawns countless versions within the Tang court, each laced with schemes and blood. At night, the elder attendants who gossip with you lower their voices. The tale goes that once restored to secular life as a mere concubine, Wu Zetian seeks to supplant the reigning empress, Empress Wang, and claim the phoenix throne herself. Step by step, she removes every rival equal to her rank, those who side with Empress Wang, who squeeze her out, who mock her behind screens as a tainted woman who has served two emperors. Once she had plucked away the feathers of Empress Wang's power, leaving her defenseless, Wu Zetian advanced toward the heart of her rival. This is the most famous and most terrifying of all the rumors. The elder attendant's voice drops lower still. It is the story of Wu Zetian's first daughter's death. In 654, Wu Zetian's newborn daughter dies suddenly. Wu Zetian insists that the childless Empress Wang, consumed by jealousy, smothers the infant while Wu is absent. Gaozong, who loves Wu deeply, is shattered by the death of his and Wu's first princess. He believes Wu's accusation, deposes Empress Wang, and casts her into the cold palace. But the horror lies in what follows. After Empress Wang's fall, whispers spread, whether sown by other concubines coveting the empress's seat, or by some other hand no one can say, that Wu Zetian herself, to seize the throne, smothers her own swaddled daughter with a small pillow, then deftly frames Empress Wang. The rumor is never proven. Soon after, in 655, merely 4 years after her return, Wu Zetian achieves her aim and becomes the new empress, second to one and above all others. This terrifying rumor is indeed recorded by certain renowned historians of the time in the chronicles they compile. Not every official history of that era includes it, but the very presence of such hints is enough to send later dynasties and even modern scholars into debate for 1,000 years. Some argue that a woman as unmatched in strategy as Wu Zetian, in a society still broadly favoring men, knowing she is young and fertile, might well sacrifice a daughter of lesser political weight to grasp supreme power. Others argue that in an age without advanced medicine, infant mortality, what modern medicine calls SIDS, was tragically common. Wu Zetian, they say, merely rides the tide of a grievous accident, turning tragedy into the perfect weapon to topple her enemies. Moreover, the compilers who record this rumor, such as those of the Old Book of Tang, are themselves champions of orthodox Confucian historiography. To them, a woman who dares meddle in even sees a man's throne and the right to govern. A supreme woman at odds with tradition who issues commands to men is already an affront. Prejudice hardens their pins. Of course, they prefer the rumor and hammer this irreverent, improper woman into a venomous schemer who stops at nothing for power. Would she truly kill her own daughter for the empress's seat? You cannot help but ask aloud. The old attendant glances around, wary, then shakes his head quickly, then nods, leaving you more confused than before. What the truth is, perhaps no one will ever know. The only thing you can be sure of is this. From the moment she enters the palace, she, like you, can never again afford softness. Her path of power is an arrow loosed at full draw. There is no turning back. Emperor Gaozong's health is frail. In his later years, he is tormented by the wind illness. Modern scholars suspect strokes, leaving him unable to govern. From 660 onward, after 6 years as empress, Zetian begins to listen from behind the screen. In nearly every audience where the emperor and ministers deliberate, she sits behind a screen to Gaozong's rear, ostensibly to assist the weakened emperor, listening to and handling affairs of state at his side. From then on, the emperor and empress are called the two sages. All know, however, that there is truly only one sage. In 683, the ailing emperor Gaozong dies. For the next 8 years, Zetian waits, cleverly. Upon the moment, she does not seize the throne at once. She understands, since antiquity, female regency is a storm of controversy. If she grabs the throne the instant her husband dies, it is rebellion, usurpation. No one will yield. Uprisings will kindle one after another. She loves power, yes, but she loves her people and her realm more. She refuses to plunge a flourishing tongue into war, division, and decline for the sake of her private desire. She means to shatter the claim that women are unfit to rule, to prove that in a woman's hands a nation can prosper. So she proceeds with patience, arranging a game that cannot be lost. First, she enthrones one of her sons as the new emperor, and as Empress Dowager, quote, unquote, assists him in all affairs, while tightening her grip upon the court. Soon, when the young emperor attempts to resist, secretly joining ministers to challenge her authority, Zetian, as the emperor's mother, personally deposes her own son, expelling him from the capital and confining him at the border. After this, she elevates another, more obedient son to the throne and repeats her method, presiding from the hall. 6 years later, the puppet emperor, kept under strict reins, finally yields, declaring himself unworthy, and that the realm requires a more capable sovereign. He personally yields the throne to his powerful, shrewd, and supremely able mother. Thus, in the year 690, 41 years after she is sent to the convent, 39 years after she is brought back to the palace, 35 years after she becomes empress, and fully 53 years after she first enters the court. This beautiful, intelligent, and forever controversial woman ascends at last. She proclaims herself emperor, the first and the only legitimately enthroned female emperor in the history of China. At night, when you are assigned to keep watch in the main hall, you face the vast chamber, silent and empty. In its center sits the dragon throne, vacant. Its edges glint with a faint wash of moonlight. The stillness presses from all sides, quiet yet suffocating. And in your awe of the Empress, a strange thread of sympathy begins to form. Sometimes you notice the ministers around her. Outwardly, they are reverent, shouting, "Long life to the Empress." Yet in the corners of their eyes a flicker betrays them, a barely seen shimmer, as if they are crushing down a deep, bone-taught contempt for a woman in power, for scholar officials steeped in Confucian orthodoxy. To let a woman rule the realm is cosmos inverted, yin and yang thrown into disorder, an aberration against heaven's order. You even once hear an old official, drunk, mutter under his breath, "The Empress, with a woman's yielding in-body, seizes a throne that belongs to a man's vigorous yang. It overturns the constellations, and so the Earth's chi is blocked." Earth's chi blocked, in the language of antiquity, means earthquake. Yes, these men, bound by feudal superstition, can even explain earthquakes as the earth's roar of anger at being pressed by a woman. Zetian, clever as she is, understands all of this perfectly. To legitimize her rule, she uses iron and silk, both, hard and soft in tandem. In political method, she vastly enlarges the intake through the imperial examinations, especially the specific degree related to open and unprecedented ladder for sons of common families. These new nobles, risen by examination and grateful for her recognition, become her loyal foundation against the entrenched aristocratic clans and win her the reputation of a sovereign who knows and gathers talent. She has many official bronze caskets set up at court and on the city's streets to receive letters from under heaven, letters from self-recommendations, remonstrances, petitions of injustice, to secret reports. With them, she bypasses the old bureaucratic arteries, seizing information and hearts directly, striking enemies on one hand while crafting the image of a ruler who opens the gates to speech and knows the people's suffering on the other. In the early consolidation before her enthronement, she employs harsh law officials like Zhou Xing and Lai Junchen, weaving a tight net of informants, purging the Li Teng clan, and potential opposition with ruthless efficiency. It is bloody, yes, but fear spreads, strong foes fall, and her road is cleared. In governance, she prizes agriculture. She soothes the people. She orders the compilation of the record of the people's original occupation to promote farming techniques and encourages local officials to lighten taxes. Stable harvests and order mean the common folk carry little resentment. Many even hold a quiet gratitude. She reforms ritual, raising women, especially mothers, within family rights. If children must mourn the father for 3 years, she decrees they must mourn the mother 3 years as well, where before it was only one. A small line in law, but a great shift in meaning, an attempt to reshape gender order through ritual. In ideology, if they say her rule is inauspicious, that heaven and earth rage against her, then she answers with omens. She rewards reports of natural forms resembling phoenixes, clouds, stones, curling oars, mountain shapes. By proclamation, the realm resounds with auspicious signs flourishing since her ascent. A subtle tide against common prejudice in a feudal mind. She renames herself, creating a character that never existed, Zhao, meaning sun and moon hung in the sky, illuminating all beneath, announcing she is no longer the shallow, bright, and alluring woman once named for her by Taizong 5 decades ago. Her beauty has long since evolved into full wisdom and capability. Her authority shines with sun and moon, tethered to the very order of the cosmos. She champions Buddhism. She elevates sutra tales of celestial maidens and divine figures descending to earth and becoming kings, framing her woman emperor identity as sacred Buddhist mandate. She orders Buddhism statues across the realm to be carved in her likeness, binding the mercy of the mother and the sovereignty of the divine, casting Buddhism as a rival to Taoist Confucian patriarchal orthodoxy, and justifying her uniqueness through religion. Many later historians acknowledge her ability and intelligence, and do not stint in offering praise. That by these means she transforms herself from a usurping empress into a legitimate sovereign, mandated by heaven, affirmed by the Buddha, skillful in rule, carving with difficulty a path to the summit of power within a man-built frame. And yet, all must admit, no matter how she tries to reshape a nation and society, what one mortal sovereign does within a short span cannot unseat the deep-rooted feudal mind of millennia, nor the rejection of and prejudice toward a woman on the throne. Sometimes, from afar, you see the empress alone in a long, empty gallery. The sunset draws her shadow out, long, so long. She stands and looks and does not move for a very long time, and you feel it suddenly. This woman at the pinnacle of power may possess everything and yet be the loneliest soul alive. Unlike the emperors before her, her reforms and governance can never rest. So long as she reigns, she must constantly, endlessly, eternally press back against waves of controversy that never cease. Even if each step is considered to the marrow, even if each step is taken with exquisite care, she still cannot truly crack the hardened shell of 1,000 years. She cannot change every mind. Anyone near her may still be a potential enemy under such unending struggle, under the crush of such profound solitude. The Empress shifts strategy from trying to change the world to seeking a balance. And so, the Empress's much argued male companions and favorites step onto history's stage. Through them, she forms a circle of power utterly loyal to her person. They are not merely companions for pleasure. They are weapons for the Empress against the feudal world itself. The story begins in the bustling markets of Luoyang. One day, you are sent outside the palace to purchase supplies. In a corner of the western market, you notice a man you cannot forget. His name is Feng Xiaobao, a peddler selling medicines on the street. Not only handsome, he is broad-shouldered, well-muscled, with a booming voice, spattering words as he boasts to a crowd about the wonders of his salves. Unlike the polished, pampered officials in the palace, he carries a wild, vital vigor, and people stop to stare. Long kept away from Luoyang's roar, you cannot help sneaking a few extra glances. But to you, he is only a lively note in the street's music, and soon you shift back to your errands. Not long after, however, an incredible bit of scandal races through the palace. They say this very Feng Xiaobao, the street medicine seller, has caught the eye of Princess Qianjin, the Empress's aunt. Princess Qianjin, half-sister to Emperor Taizong, first husband to the Empress Wu Zetian, the aunt to Emperor Gaozong, her second husband. In law, also the Empress's aunt, has long sought every means to please the Empress Wu Zetian, hoping to draw nearer the inner ring of power. While touring the markets of Luoyang, the princess sees this striking, vigorous man, brimming with energy, and she chooses him at a glance. Some unofficial notes claim Princess Qianjin first takes Feng Xiaobao into her residence and personally tried him. Satisfied with his abilities, she has him taught basic court manners, gives him fine clothes, scrubs away a layer of street roughness, making him more presentable. When all is ready, the princess deftly introduces Feng Xiaobao to Wu Zetian as a folk expert skilled in massage, to relieve the fatigue of a sovereign who debates stiff, stubborn ministers each day, who labors for the realm each night. A widowed woman in midlife, faced daily with unbending elder statesmen. The Empress understands at once and summons Fong, his powerful build, his street-born quickness, his untamed energy, unlike any palace man, all please the Empress Wu Zetian greatly. Her brilliance is not only for statecraft. To make this commoner enter and exit the strictly guarded, ritual-bound Tang Palace without offense, she devises yet another clever road. Under her Buddhist-leaning rule, she first orders Feng to shave his head and take orders, becoming a monk of pure and lofty identity. Next, she has her own daughter, the famed Princess Taiping, enter Feng into her husband's clan registry, changing his surname from Feng to Shui, matching the princess's husband, and conferring the new name, Huaiyi. She then has the princess's husband acknowledge Shui Huaiyi as quote-unquote uncle. Thus, the commoner of the streets gains a spotless monastic identity and simultaneously a noble clan identity tied to the princess's household with a new name, Shui Huaiyi. He completes his transformation and strides onto the stage of history. For a long time thereafter, this most favored of the Empress Wu Zetian's companions goes in and out of the Tang Palace at will, citing Buddhist lectures and doctrinal debates as his reason to enter the Empress's private chambers freely. Gone are the coarse, short coats of a peddler. He wears splendid monastic robes, and with the Empress's favor, his native handsomeness blazes. The rebellious spark between his brows stands in fierce contrast to the lifeless, posturing old men of the court, and the Empress cannot turn away. Yet all know the absurdity. A street hawker, overnight, becomes the uncle of a royal son-in-law. Dress it in any legal fiction you like, it remains incredible to the point of comedy. You see the faces of noble-born officials twisted with disdain and shock, but none dare oppose openly. And you cannot help thinking, a woman as brilliant as the Empress, how could she not know such contrivance convinces no one? Why does she do it anyway? Is it only loneliness? Is it that she has grown old or foolish? But as you slowly watch what Shui Huaiyi does within the palace, you begin to understand. Things are not so simple. Shui Huaiyi is never merely a favorite. He is more like a weapon, carefully chosen, deliberately placed by the Empress Wu Zetian herself, a tool meant to challenge and unsettle the old order. He comes from the streets with no political pedigree. This means every shred of rank and honor he now possesses flows solely from the Empress's favor. Absolute loyalty is the only path left to him. Yes, he is coarse and arrogant. Yes, he lacks the polish of formal education, and he refuses to bow beneath the suffocating etiquette of the court. But that is precisely the point. His defiance crashes into the stiff, ritual-bound aristocrats, men who despise him from the marrow, yet cannot dislodge him. This man is the stone the Empress hurls into the stagnant pond of court politics, and the ripples are exactly what she intends. Historians forever debate the Empress and her companions. Take Shui Huaiyi as an example. Across dynasties, Confucian chroniclers paint his bond with the Empress Wu Zetian as nothing but carnality, a weapon to slander the Empress's later years as shameless, debauched, consumed by lust. They linger on her widowhood, claiming she is a woman ravenous with desire, and on him as one who peddled his flesh within the palace, grasping at power by indulging the cravings of an aging empress. But not all scholars agree. Others caution that such a view is shallow, conveniently cruel. Through closer study of the records, they point out that Shui Huaiyi carries many roles. Yes, he is her lover. She is human. Desire and companionship are human, even for an emperor. But beyond that, he serves as her blunt political hammer, wielded to smash those ministers who endlessly mouth the rights, who chain women, even their sovereign, with moral shackles, who revere prejudice and feudal rigidity more than the living results of governance. For those officials who slight or defy the Empress Wu Zetian, she cannot always punish them directly. But Shui Huaiyi can. Arrogant in her favor, he seizes the chance, or manufactures one, to humiliate, strike, or overwhelm the man who has offended her. He even mirrors her strategy of legitimization. Outside the palace, he gathers his friends and has them all shave their heads, ordaining as monks together. With Buddhist robes as their shield, they march in and out of the palace openly, like a personal guard sworn not to the throne, but to him. Together, this clique bullies and taunts the ministers who sneer at them, especially those who cling to Taoism, men stubborn in their rejection of the Buddhism the Empress now champions. It is crude, it is brutish, but it is also effective. Vengeance delivered without hesitation, a fist where a decree would falter. When complaints reach her, the Empress plays her part. She scolds Shui Huaiyi lightly, perhaps imposes a token punishment. More often, she merely feigns anger before the accuser, only to let the matter drift away with a faint wave. And so, within the palace walls, those like you, servants and attendants, learn to step aside when he passes. You never cross him. You never risk offense. Whispers float constantly around you. Has the Empress grown foolish? Has her brilliance dimmed, clouded by passion? Is Shu Huaiyi, in truth, the male Empress, second only to her and above all others? But then, one day, Shui Huaiyi dares to offend the sitting chancellor, and in what follows, you discover the true answer. One of Empress Wu's serving chancellors, Su Liangzi, was no ordinary minister. Before he became her chancellor, he had already served her late husband, Emperor Gaozong of Tang. Though aged, Chancellor Su was no rigid pedant bound to empty ritual. He was a man of true ability, a statesman respected by all for his governance and his integrity. He had witnessed firsthand the Empress Wu Zetian's rise, how as Empress consort she began to participate in state affairs under Gaozong, and how, step by step, she took the throne herself. Through it all, he was no blind opponent. On the contrary, he could objectively acknowledge her brilliance in ruling the empire and served her loyally. Whenever a policy genuinely benefited the state and its people, Chancellor Su would throw his full weight behind it. His endorsement carried immense influence, often swaying other officials toward acceptance of her rule. For the Empress, such support was invaluable. She held this elder statesman in high regard, yet Chancellor Su had no tolerance for petty men who flouted law and ritual. So, while he bore no quarrel with the Empress herself, he despised her arrogant favorite, Shui Huaiyi. At last, their paths collided. One day, outside the grand audience hall, beneath the shadowed eaves of the porch, Shu Huaiyi crossed the chancellor's path. Though he basked in the Empress's favor, Shui Huaiyi was, in name, nothing more than a monk of the Baima temple. Measured by rank or office, he was dust beneath the chancellor's feet. But swollen with pride, Shu Huaiyi strode past without so much as a bow. No gesture of courtesy, no act of deference. He swaggered arrogantly, brushing shoulders with the highest minister of the realm, as if Chancellor Su were invisible. How could the chancellor abide such insolence? His fury was instant. He barked to his guards, "Drag that impudent bald donkey before me." In a rush, Chancellor Su's attendants seized Shu Huaiyi and forced him to the ground at the chancellor's feet. Chancellor Su raised the young man's handsome face and struck it hard, left and right, again and again, until dozens of sharp blows rang through the air. Bruised and swollen, Shui Huaiyi fled straight to the Empress, weeping and wailing his grievance. Many expected her to lash out, blinded by passion, to defend her beloved favorite, but the Empress spoke not a word of reproach against the chancellor. Not one. Instead, she soothed her lover with gifts of gold and rich rewards. She granted him a new privilege, the right to enter the palace through the northern gate, reserved solely for him. She advised him never again to approach the southern gate or the southern offices, for those were the domain of ministers, an old tradition never to be disturbed. To outsiders, such an arrangement seemed trivial. Yet in the palace, to assign a gate for one man alone was an honor, a quiet symbol of favor. It eased Shu's wounded pride. Meanwhile, the chancellor's blows, those stinging slaps across Shu's cheeks, breathed relief into many ministers who had long suffered his insolence but dared not speak. And so, with a stroke of subtle genius, the Empress balanced the scales. She comforted her favorite without weakening the authority of her chancellor. She upheld the dignity of the court's laws while still protecting her own. In that moment, all understood. Her eyes and ears remained sharp. The Empress Wu Zetian had not been blinded by love, nor dulled by age. She still ruled with clarity, beyond being the Empress's lover, beyond serving as the iron hammer against feudal rights. Xu Huaiyi also bore another identity within his many roles. He was her agent of religion at the very moment when the Empress Wu Zetian needed to elevate Buddhism, to challenge Taoism, a faith tightly bound with Confucian patriarchy and the doctrine of male supremacy. Shu, as a monk of the Baima Temple, the most renowned Buddhist monastery of the Tang, was elevated even further. He was appointed abbot, the highest seat of that sacred house. He did not merely preside over Taoism's suppression. He also oversaw the construction of great ritual halls, modeled after those of the ancient sage kings, designed for imperial sacrifice and doctrine. Among them stood the famed Mingtang and Tiantang, monuments without precedent, each raising the Empress Wu Zetian's rule into the realm of divine legitimacy, binding her throne to the lineage of sacred kings of antiquity. The Mingtang, the main hall, was the largest wooden structure in the known world at the time. It rose more than 86 meters high, capable of holding tens of thousands within its vast embrace, surpassing every palace hall built in dynasties before. Its form broke from rigid, square tradition. A square foundation anchored the hall, yet its roof curved into a perfect circle, embodying the beliefs of the cosmic principle at that time, heaven round, earth square. A message that this was no ordinary palace, but a hall aligned with the order of the universe itself. Upon its gilded roof gleamed a jewel-like pinnacle, crowned with a golden phoenix 3 meters tall. Beneath the bird, 9 golden dragons, coiled and arched upward, their bodies straining together to bear the phoenix aloft. It was an image unmistakable. For the first time in Chinese history, the symbol of the Empress, the phoenix, was placed above the dragons of emperors. Imagine the sight in the bustling city of Luoyang, as the red dusk of sunset bathed its lacquered walls. This colossal hall rose, geometric and flawless, etched with carvings and painted in 1,000 colors, its gilded roof blazing, its phoenix glittering. held aloft by dragons. It was not merely architecture, it was spectacle, a declaration in wood and gold. That woman now stood above man. From the day it was completed, all great ceremonies of state were held within the Ming tongue. Here, the Empress Wu Zetian received the court's homage. Here she proclaimed her decrees. Here the political heart of her reign beat strongest. Beside it stood Tian Tung, the Hall of Heaven, a vast Buddhist sanctuary. Though its footprint was smaller than Ming Tung's, its height soared nearly twice as great, towering more than 160 meters. The tallest wooden building of its time, unmatched across the world of the 7th century. Its name spoke its purpose, a hall closer to the sky, closer to the cosmos, a temple to heaven itself. Inside it towered a Buddha of staggering scale, carved with the Empress Wu Zetian's own visage as its model. Nearly 100 meters tall, it loomed over all who entered. It was said that even a single finger of this statue required several grown men, hand in hand, to encircle. Its size was incomprehensible, its message undeniable. Through this colossal image, the Empress not only magnified Buddhism across her empire, she also transformed divine narrative into political weapon, silencing Confucian cries that a woman could not rule. For here stood proof. Heaven itself bore her likeness, and at the center of it all was Shu Huaiyi. It was he who oversaw the building of both Mingtung and Tiantung. With their swift and triumphant completion, his standing within the palace reached its peak. He was ennobled, granted the title of Duke of Liang, a rank of the highest order, surpassed only by that of kings. With it came endless treasures and rewards, marking the zenith of a man who once sold medicine in the streets. Yet, as the old saying warns, when the moon grows full, it begins to wane. When the vessel brims, it spills. Power, desire, and jealousy soon consumed the favored consort who had risen too high. As the Empress aged, she began to favor another man, her imperial physician, Shen. Unlike Shu Huaiyi, Shen was gentle, considerate, skilled in easing the aches of age. His quiet tenderness stood in stark contrast to Shu's wild arrogance. For Shu, jealousy flared hotter than fire. The man who had once been raised from nothing by the Empress Wu Zetian's grace could not bear to see another hold her attention. Blinded by envy, he committed an act so reckless it bordered on self-destruction. Everyone knew the Spring Festival was China's greatest celebration, and within it, the Lantern Festival marked the finale, the luminous crescendo of joy and unity, to end the new year properly, to light the path of the coming 12 months, was an omen of harmony and fortune. In Luoyang, the imperial palace would hold its grandest banquet. Princes, ministers, foreign envoys, all gathered under golden lamps. Beyond the red walls, the city bloomed with lanterns in every color, streets overflowing with laughter, songs, wine, and poetry. At the end, the Empress herself would ascend the palace tower, gazing down on her capital, her people bowing in joy before the realm she ruled. But in the Lantern Festival of the year 695, the Empress's 5th year as emperor, this night of unity and brilliance became her greatest humiliation. For on that very night, Shu Huaiyi, burning with jealousy and rage, set fire to Tiantong, the towering hall he himself had overseen. The flames, fanned by winter winds, leapt beyond control and consumed the neighboring Mingtong. 2 halls, the greatest architectural wonders of their age, the very heart of the Empress Wu Zetian's political and ritual order, symbols of imperial glory built to affirm her reign, vanished in a single inferno, reduced to ash by the hand of her own consort. Records say the blaze lit the sky as if turning night into day. The city's lantern festival, meant to dazzle in colors of joy, was drowned in the blinding terror of fire. What should have been fire trees and silver flowers became the empire's dread spectacle. Laughter fell into silence. Wine soured into fear. The Empress was overcome with fury and with shame. The man she had lifted from dust, the weapon she had wielded against tradition, the hammer she had cast into the stagnant waters of court, had turned and struck her own foundation. It was a humiliation beyond measure. She did not punish him at once. Instead, she ordered Shu Huaiyi to lead the reconstruction, outwardly sparing him, but within, her patience had ended. Trust was gone. The hammer was broken. It had swung too far. Quietly, she began to arrange her response. A cadre of strong palace maids, her secret guard, was chosen. One night, when Shu Huaiyi, believing his crime forgiven, lowered his guard, an imperial summons reached him. He entered the palace unarmed, unthinking. No sooner had he crossed the threshold than soldiers rose from the shadows, encircling him. At the Empress's signal, clubs rained down. Strike by strike, they crushed him, beating the life from the man who had once strutted like a king. Thus ended Shu Huaiyi. His body received no honor. It was carted quietly to the Baima temple, where it was burned to ash. His remains were mixed with soil, pressed into the foundation of a Buddhist stupa. A man who once strutted across the palace as Duke of Liang, a man who dared to defy ministers and brandish the Empress's favor like a blade, ended just like that, beneath the feet of common worshippers, trampled into earth by those who came to pray. Dust to dust, ash to ash. The mighty consort was no more. The death of Shu Huaiyi marked the end of the first phase of the Empress's consort strategy. It also signaled the opening act for a new generation of favorites, more refined, more dangerous. Shui Huaiyi's era had begun with fire and bravado and ended in a blaze of humiliation and blood. Yet, at the height of his power, when he strutted through the palace with unchecked arrogance, a quieter machinery was already being set in motion. Within the Forbidden City, an entirely new institution was created, cloaked in mystery, whispered of only in careful tones, the Bureau of Crane Control, Kung Herfu. The first time you were dispatched there on duty, the name itself puzzled you. What did Crane Control mean? It was only later, listening to an older eunuch of great learning, that you came to understand. The words Kung Her, to control cranes, were not chosen lightly. They traced back to a famous Taoist legend. It was said that Prince Chiao, the immortal, once mastered the art of guiding sacred cranes. With these divine birds, he ascended to the heavens, achieving immortality. Thus, Kung Her came to mean riding the crane to ascend, attaining the way to immortality. An auspicious phrase, shimmering with promise. So the Bureau of Crane Control, in its literal sense, became the residence of those who command celestial cranes. And in that instant, the brilliance of the name struck you. What it truly concealed was a male harem, a household of beautiful men gathered to serve the Empress, but wrapped in the language of transcendence draped in Taoist allegory. It became something else entirely, a sanctuary of seekers, companions on the Empress's path to immortality. By cloaking desire in the imagery of cranes of heaven, of the Tao, the institution transformed scandal into sanctity. These young men, handsome, gifted, radiant, as if descended from heaven, were not lovers, not consorts. They were summoned to assist the sovereign in seeking the way. How then could one speak of lust or debauchery? After all, emperors of every dynasty had sought long life. They had chased elixirs, built alchemical furnaces, summoned mystics and monks. If the Empress Wu Zetian surrounded herself with youthful brilliance and called them her guides on the path to transcendence, was she not simply following the footsteps of her predecessors? And should any minister dare object? The counterstroke was obvious. To resist the sovereign's pursuit of longevity was to wish her death, and to be accused of cursing the life of the emperor or the empress was a charge no one could survive. And so the Bureau of Crane Control became, quite naturally, the liveliest, most unusual, and most mysterious presence within the palace of the Empress. You quietly observed the young men who passed in and out of this wondrous place, and gradually you realized something. To be chosen for the Bureau, mere beauty was never enough. These men were radiant not only in appearance, but also in talent. Many were gifted beyond measure, some even destined to be remembered for centuries. Indeed, Chinese records confirm that several great poets whose verses are still studied and recited today were once members of this bureau, men like Song Ziwen and Du Shenyan. And they were not poets alone. There were young scholars, steeped in philosophy, eloquent in debate, fluent in politics. There were merchants, seasoned by travel along the Silk Road, versed in astronomy and geography, men who had seen distant lands and mastered the secrets of trade. There were physicians, skilled in medicine, acupuncture, and massage, guardians of health and longevity. There were martial heroes, white-robed and graceful, whose artful combat was as mesmerizing as dance. Even magicians and alchemists appeared among them, adept in sleight of hand, tricks, and secret arts that dazzled the imagination. And of course, there were flatterers, clever-tongued, smooth, calculating men who thrived on charm. Slowly, you began to see the bureau for what it truly was. This was not simply a harem, not a chamber of indulgence created to satisfy private desire. It was something far greater, a personal think tank, a literary salon, a carefully chosen circle of brilliance for the Empress. It served many purposes. First, it soothed the Empress's mind. On the formal court stage, she sparred each day with ministers bound to Confucian orthodoxy, men who scolded her with tradition, rebuked her with ancient rites, men who saw her gender as a crime against heaven. Those sessions left her weary, embattled, drained. But in the Bureau of Crane Control, the air was different. Here, she was greeted by youthful faces, spirited laughter, bright eyes, and eager voices. Here, she could debate literature and art, religion and philosophy, astronomy and geography. Here, she could hear perspectives unbound by ossified custom, stories of the world beyond the palace walls, of foreign lands, of strange wonders. She could recline, let acupuncture needles ease her weary body, while young warriors displayed their martial grace, or magicians conjured marvels before her eyes. In this relaxed, unguarded space, in an atmosphere of free thought, delight, and respite, she could loosen her burdens, refresh her mind, and even reach decisions with sharper clarity and broader vision. Second, the Bureau was a reservoir of loyal talent. The Empress knew that to counterbalance the entrenched aristocrats, the Li Tung clans, and Guanlong nobility, she needed new men, skilled, capable, but unbound by family power. The Bureau was the perfect reservoir. Its members were chosen for ability, not bloodline. Their only patron was the Empress herself. Their futures, their rise, their very survival depended on her favor. In them, she forged a new class of loyalists, sidestepping the suffocating stranglehold of aristocratic families. Third, the Bureau became her network of eyes and ears. Drawn from the people, these young men had wide experience, diverse knowledge, and fresh ways of thinking. They moved freely between palace and city, gathering whispers, news, and truths that the formal bureaucracy could not or would not deliver. Through them, the Empress Wu Zetian could sense the empire's pulse directly, from the marble courts of ministers to the crowded streets of Luoyang and all cities of her empire, and guard against threats before they could bloom. In this way, the Bureau of Crane Control was no frivolity. It was a bold experiment, a tool for consolidating power, a balance against tradition, a fountain of culture and delight, and a shield against the loneliness of rule. Yet debate over its true nature has never ceased. Conservative historians have always painted it as a den of decadence, a male harem, proof of the empress's supposed immorality. But as modern scholarship deepens, fueled by archaeology, by context, by critical reading, many now challenge that view. They argue, could a woman of Wu Zetian's brilliance, so keenly aware of the fragility of her legitimacy, so relentless in rationalizing her reign, truly have built such an institution only for pleasure? Would she really expose herself to scandal in order to satisfy a whim? Such a picture does not align with logic, nor with the pattern of her rule. Yes, the stories of romance and scandal may hold grains of truth, but how much was slander whispered by her enemies to blacken her name? How much was embroidered later by male historians who could not bear the thought of a woman who ruled them? Perhaps, like so much of the Empress Wu Zetian's life, this remains another riddle of history, unsolved, unanswerable. And you, watching the finely dressed, witty young men laugh and spar in the bureau, sometimes glimpsed a shadow among them, a memory, a ghost, the ghost of Xue Huaiyi, the rough, unpolished man who began it all, the hammer that broke the silence of the court, now long forgotten, buried in contempt, contrasting starkly with these polished courtiers in silk. Yes, he was the beginning, and he was destroyed by the very hand that raised him. The Empress had declared with his death a cold and absolute truth. An era had ended. You realize that Empress Wu Zetian's methods of rule are constantly evolving, becoming more mature, more intricate, more refined. She is no longer satisfied with using a blunt instrument like Xu Huaiyi to batter the world into submission. Now, she begins to wield sharper, subtler, more precise tools, like a surgeon's scalpel instead of a hammer. As Xu Huaiyi declined from his once unchallenged height of favor, and as the Bureau of Crane Control grew more complete and well-formed, a new force began to stir. It marked the rise of something unprecedented in the Tang Dynasty, a whirlwind of power that belonged solely to the empress herself, operating outside the traditional court system. And at the eye of this storm, ready to fill the vacuum left by the brutal death of Shui Huaiyi, stood the next chosen favorites. Whispers filled the palace. Speculation spread in hushed tones. Who will be the next fortunate one? And soon the answer revealed itself in a most dramatic way. This time, the recommendation did not come from a distant imperial relative trying to curry favor. It came instead from the most illustrious princess of the Empress Wu Zetian's reign. Indeed, one of the most famous women of the entire late Tang Dynasty, Princess Taiping. She was the Empress's youngest and most beloved daughter, the sole legitimate princess of the royal bloodline. She had once played a key role in legitimizing Shui Huaiyi's entry into the palace, and she herself was a woman of immense power, second only to the Empress, yet already feared and respected across the empire. Like her mother, she was intelligent, daring, rebellious toward tradition, and brimming with political ambition. It was Princess Taiping who introduced a young man named Zhang Changzong. At the time, Zhang Changzong was barely 20 years old. His face was strikingly handsome, his manners graceful and refined. He was skilled in music, knowledgeable in the arts, adept at the four accomplishments: qin, chess, calligraphy, and painting. When presented before the Empress, his youth and beauty might have seemed enough to intimidate him. But no, he showed no awkwardness before Her Majesty's awe-inspiring presence. Instead, he carried himself with quick wit, charm, and polished elegance. And he did not come alone. Zhang Changzong also introduced his elder brother, Zhang Yiji, equally delicate in appearance, but especially learned in Taoist arts of health, medicine, and alchemy. One brother brought beauty and talent in the arts. The other brought knowledge of longevity and the promise of immortality. For the Empress Wu Zetian, by now aging, increasingly preoccupied with health, and ever more enthralled by the dream of transcending mortality, the combination was irresistible. Thus unfolded a scene almost unparalleled in the annals of Chinese court history. Two brothers, side by side, both elevated to become the personal favorites of the most powerful ruler in the land, both serving not only at her side, but in her heart. It did not take long for the Zhang brothers, with their dazzling talents, refined manners, and dual gifts of beauty and intellect, to surpass not only the dead Shui Huaiyi, but every other court favorite before them. They were, in every way, a new generation. The first time you saw them, you immediately understood how different they were from their predecessor. If Shui Huaiyi had been a wild tiger, brutal, forceful, unrestrained. Then the Zhang brothers were truly like a pair of elegant cranes, gliding gracefully through the palace air. Their skin was pale, their features fine, their beauty so striking that they often dusted their faces with light powder. They wore robes of rich brocade, their appearance so immaculate that they seemed like figures stepping out of a painted scroll, if not for their broad shoulders and their simple central top knots, the hairstyle of men. You might have mistaken them for noble concubines of the highest rank. Unlike Shui Huaiyi, who relied on bluster and bullying to impose his presence, the Zhang brothers conquered with refinement. They captivated the Empress Wu Zetian's heart not through force, but with gentleness, elegance, and grace. Why did the Empress make such a choice? Why shift from a rough, forceful, strong man to a pair of refined, delicate, flower-like men? Was this merely a change of personal taste, a shift in aesthetic preference? Historians of later generations have offered differing interpretations. The most common view is that this transformation reflected a change in the Empress's own mindset of rule and a growth of maturity and sophistication in her political strategy. In the era of Shu Huaiyi, she had only recently ascended the throne. Her position was still unstable. She needed someone like him, an attack dog, to intimidate and crush her opponents. However, the disaster of Shui Huaiyi's unchecked arrogance had also taught her a vital lesson that raw violence and intimidation, without precision, without addressing the root of problems, could never endure. Then, by the time the Zhang brothers entered the stage, the Empress's reign was already secure. Most of her opposition in court had been assimilated, subdued, or purged. She was no longer the newly enthroned ruler, flustered under pressure from her adversaries, striking wildly in every direction. She no longer required a brute, one who understood nothing but force, who lacked flexibility, and who might, worse, at any moment, rebound, lose control, and turn against her. Instead, what she needed were companions who were clever, refined, sensitive, those who could provide her not only with political utility, but also with emotional comfort, intellectual stimulation, and spiritual solace. Those who could move fluidly within the intricate ecosystem of the court, those who understood nuance, who could adapt with subtlety, who could assist her in dissolving obstacles with precision, those who could grasp every facet of this vast empire and help her govern it more efficiently, more gracefully, more sustainably. The Zhang brothers, though from humble origins, sons of only minor officials, were still children of an official household. They had received some degree of education and cultural cultivation, and though they still had much to learn and space to grow compared to the coarse, reckless Shu Huaiyi, these quick-witted brothers were far better suited to navigate the intricate rules and hidden currents of court life. They could infiltrate politics in a more civilized way, influence decisions with greater precision, and help the Empress advance her ambitions more effectively. The arrival of the Zhang brothers marked a turning point. It showed that the path of imperial favorites, already dangerous, already intoxicating, was reaching toward a height never before seen. And you, as witness and bystander to it all, watched how this golden, resplendent palace grew ever more dazzling, softer, more ornate with the arrival of the Zhang brothers. And yet, as the Empress slowly aged, you also sensed an undercurrent of strangeness seeping through. Among the two brothers, unlike the elder, who immersed himself in Taoist alchemy and mysticism, the younger, Zhang Changzong, proved sharper, more calculating, more attuned to intrigue, well-read, endlessly clever. He had a gift for reading the Empress's moods, for discerning her desires, for offering precisely what pleased her. It was this skill that secured him the deeper share of her favor. The Empress even bestowed upon him a name of rare intimacy, Liu Lang. Liu is the number 6. In Chinese tradition, such a nickname, combining a man's birth order within his family with the character Lang reserved for husband or lover, was almost always used only between the most intimate of couples. But what truly elevated Zhang Changzong beyond all others was not only his beauty, nor his wit, nor the pet name upon the Empress's lips. It was a whisper, a legend, a carefully woven tale that spread like wildfire through the palace. Whether crafted by the Zhang brothers themselves or conceived at the Empress's behest, no one could say. One day, the rumor appeared, mysteriously, absurdly, among you and the countless eunuchs and maids of the court. It crept softly from one mouth to another, from lowly servant upward, until it reached every hall and chamber. It claimed that Zhang Changzong, delicate in face, graceful in manner, gifted in every art, was none other than the reincarnation of the immortal Prince Chiao. Yes, Prince Chiao, the same immortal mentioned before, who had mastered the divine cranes of heaven, and riding them, ascended into the celestial realm. The legend told of him, in the early days of China, more than 1,200 years before the Tang Dynasty, he was the beloved crown prince of Emperor Ling of the Zhou Dynasty, the 3rd dynasty of ancient China. Through years of cultivation, he could play the flute so beautifully that it mimicked the cry of the phoenix, summoning the sacred cranes of heaven. At last, he ascended upon a white crane, rising between the Yi and Luo rivers, until he vanished from mortal sight, transfigured into an immortal, and Zhang Changzong. He was famed for his mastery of music, especially the flute. Time and again you and all who served in the palace had been entranced by the strains of his playing, drifting through the gilded halls, haunting, ethereal. The coincidence was too perfect. The tale of the phoenix crying flute that summoned the cranes matched his gift exactly. Thus the rumor spread, swift, unstoppable. Modern historians see it for what it was, a brilliant act of political theater, by casting Zhang Changzong as the reincarnation of a celestial being. They raised him from the realm of the worldly into the sphere of the divine, offering a sacred justification for the empress's devotion to him. He was no mere consort. He was a spirit reborn, sent to aid the Holy Mother and Divine Empress in her reign. This tale also explained, with supernatural inevitability, the Empress Wu Zetian's sudden shift from favoring a rough, virile figure like Shui Huaiyi to cherishing a refined, almost ethereal beauty like Zhang Changzong. Moreover, the legend of Prince Chao in his crane flight to heaven was the very origin of the Bureau of Crane Control's name. By aligning Zhang Changzong with that same myth, the story further reinforced the Bureau's aura of sanctity and legitimacy. You witnessed it with your own eyes, an extravagant performance played across the palace stage. The Empress's nephew, himself a leading minister and loyal supporter, took the lead in proclaiming praise, composing hymns and poems, extolling this immortal reborn. Soon the entire court followed. Those solemn, self-righteous officials who once sneered at the young favorites, those who prided themselves on stern Confucian rectitude, suddenly transformed, clothed in lofty words, they rushed to outdo one another, weaving ornate praises for Zhang Changzong, not out of love, but out of fear, out of ambition, out of the hope that by praising an immortal, they might borrow his luck or flatter the Empress herself. You felt a wave of absurdity wash over you. And in that moment, you understood something, that everything, no matter how irrational, no matter how contradictory, once cloaked in the name of the divine, suddenly became reasonable. Whenever you found the chance, you studied this man, Zhang Changzong, the favorite, who now shone as bright as the midday sun. You had seen him in those lazy afternoons when he accompanied the Empress in the palace gardens, composing melodies, matching verses, admiring blossoms. Wherever he was, the stern Empress's face would soften into laughter. You had also noticed how whenever the Empress betrayed even the faintest hint of weariness, a glance, a turn of the head, the faintest flick of the hand, he would sense it immediately. Before anyone else had even noticed, he would quietly signal a servant to bring what she needed: a chair, a blanket, a fan, ice, tea, or sweets. At times, he would kneel himself to massage her legs, to ease her strain. All this Delicacy, gentleness, attentiveness, talent, thoughtfulness were precisely what the rough, boorish Xu Huaiyi had lacked. The new favorite gave the aging empress something far richer, a total fulfillment across spirit, affection, body, and beauty. It was a kind of wholeness the hot-tempered, uncontrollable Xu Huaiyi could never provide. But if you thought Zhang Changzong and his brother were nothing more than gentle, harmless men of letters, you were gravely mistaken. The Zhang brothers, brilliant and well-read, possessed not only charm, but keen political instinct, and very soon you saw the truth. Beneath their graceful, water-like softness, their beat hearts restless with ambition, they understood well that all their power, all their honor, rested entirely on the Empress's favor. Once she passed from the world, their lives would hang by a thread, their fate almost certainly ruin, perhaps even death without a grave. So they knew they must prepare their path while she still lived. And soon these brothers, so artful, so restless, moved boldly. They set their hands upon an issue that had long haunted the Empress's reign, the succession. The problem was this: the Empress Wu Zetian's family name was Wu, yet her husband's was Li. Throughout history, a mother and her children belong not to her natal clan, but to her husband's. Thus, every child Wu bore carried the surname Li, sons of the Li house, heirs of the Li line. But the Empress Wu Zetian, who had struggled through decades of storms to seize the throne in her own right, asked herself, if her son of the Li family inherited her empire, what had all her labor been for? Would it not mean she had merely held the throne in trust, managing it for the Li clan, only to hand it back at the end? Would all the defiance, all the suffering, all the battles she had endured simply dissolve into nothing, returning everything to where it began? She had fought not as an Empress Dowager, but as Emperor. She had endured rebellions, accusations, humiliation, betrayal. She had labored for years to reshape the empire, to carve her name into history. And in the end, what would remain? Nothing if the throne passed to Li's sons and her Wu line vanished from power. So, she conceived another path, to name her nephew Wu Chengzi as crown prince. In this way, the throne would remain within her bloodline, within the Wu family. But such an idea struck the court like thunder. Every faction outside her clan resisted with ferocity. It was at this most perilous moment, when the empire's future itself teetered, that the Zhang brothers made their move. To secure their own future in the looming question of succession, the Zhang brothers acted with remarkable cunning. They worked first upon the Empress herself, gently but firmly, reminding her of the true reason she had seized the throne. It was not for the throne's splendor, nor for the naked lust of power, but to prove that a woman's rule could rival any man's, that she, too, could govern for the good of the people. At the same time, they moved among the Wu clan ministers and supporters, using the language of tradition to sway their hearts. They said the empress had already married into the Li family twice, even if she had never formally changed her surname. In custom and culture, she was already a Li. Her sons were Lis. If she, as mother of the Li line, held the empire in trust until a Li son could rule, it was not truly usurpation, it was guardianship. But if a Wu man claimed the throne, that was something else entirely. That was a true change of dynasty, an outright usurpation of the world itself. And to change dynasties without the support of the majority, of ministers, aristocrats, common people, impossible. It would bring uprisings, civil war, chaos. The peace and prosperity of Tang would collapse into ruin. And what use was a ruined empire to the Wu clan, even if they managed to seize it? This reasoning, woven skillfully by the Zhang brothers and their allies, took root. It softened the doubts of the empress herself, and even persuaded those Wu ministers who had wavered on the edge of rebellion. In the end, the Empress Wu Zetian made her decision. She summoned back to the capital the very son she had once deposed and exiled to the frontier. Li Xian, her first dethroned emperor. She restored him as crown prince. This single act revealed the brilliance of the Zhang brothers' political maneuvering. By standing with the reinstated Li heir, they extended a hand to the old Tang aristocracy, easing hostility, while at the same time binding the future emperor to them in gratitude. It was, for them, an insurance policy against the storm that would follow the empress's death. And so you gazed upon the ever-smiling beautiful men, Zhang Qingzong, his delicate face lit with charm, his laughter easy and bright. But in your heart rose a chill of disbelief. This man was far more dangerous than his flower-like beauty suggested. You remembered then the gossip that clung to the Zhang brothers like incense smoke, rumors that even later historians could not untangle. It was said they were more than brothers, that they were lovers. Some modern interpreters point to the ancient records. The brothers painted their faces, powdered their cheeks, walked with a feminine grace, and were almost never apart. From this, some speculate they may not have been brothers in truth, but eunuchs, perhaps secretly castrated before entering the palace, companions to the aging empress, in a bond more like confidants than consorts. Others, however, especially traditional Confucian historians, eager to vilify the Empress Wu Zetian, insisted that the brothers were nothing more than decadent favorites, her lovers, proof of her supposed addiction to pleasure and decline into vice. They wrote with certainty, branding her late reign as one of excess, clouded by sensual indulgence. What happened within the private chambers of the Empress's palace remains forever a mystery. But one thing is beyond doubt: whether, as lovers, confidants, or both, the Zhang brothers stirred the politics of the Empress Wu Zetian's later reign in ways no one before them had dared. At the time, you could not yet know. That moment when the Zhang brothers stood with the Li heir against the Wu clan's ambitions was the first and last time their influence aligned with wisdom. From then on, step by step, they would be drawn ever deeper into the intoxicating whirlpool of power. After this victory, the Zhang brothers' standing grew ever more secure, and the Empress's mysterious salon, the think tank they led, entered a full transformation. The Bureau of Crane Control was reborn. In the year 700, the Empress Wu Zetian formally decreed that Kung Herfu, the Bureau of Crane Control, be renamed Feng Chen Fu, the Bureau of Imperial Service. The shift from Kung He to Feng Chen was heavy with meaning. The old name, controlling cranes, carried a drifting Taoist aura, yes, but it also hinted at handling, playing with, even manipulating sacred birds. It suggested entertainment and experimentation more than upright purpose, and to liken the Bureau's brilliant young men to creatures, however elegant, was in some measure to objectify and diminish them. In truth, Kung He had always been a casual, unofficial label. The new name, Feng Chen, to serve the august sovereign, declared a different order of things. From this point on, the men of the residence were no longer pretty objects to be admired and toyed with, but talented servants of the throne, formally charged with the ruler's business. The title defined their remit as something far beyond the body, and it lifted the Bureau into the dignity of a recognized official palace institution. Later historians have often read this integration into the state machinery as the Empress's effort to regularize and legitimize what had begun as her private power center, an institution that, left unnamed and unframed, might later stain her great name. By renaming and restructuring it, she sought to anchor it within the formal order of the realm, and thus quiet the accusations that would surely come. The Bureau of Imperial Service, thus reborn, became nothing less than the Zhang brothers' state within the state, the clearest emblem of their power at its zenith. You saw them gliding through the palace halls in the finest silks, adorned with the rarest ornaments, faces powdered and painted with exquisite care. Wherever they passed, envy and awe followed in equal measure. The Empress's favor even spilled beyond them to their family. Their widowed mother, Lady Zhang, was granted official rank and privileges equal to foreign dignitaries. And when the Empress Wu Zetian learned of her solitude, she made a decree that shocked the realm. She ordered a senior minister, the Chancellor Li Jiangshu, himself of noble stock, to serve as Lady Zhang's intimate companion. Historians today argue that the Empress acted not from chance, but from something deeper, her growing distaste for the Li clan and for Chancellor Li most of all. For the refined world of Tang aristocracy, steeped in ritual and propriety, such a command was unthinkable humiliation. Chancellor Li could not defy an imperial edict, but he resisted by drowning himself in drink, staggering each day into Lady Zhang's presence in a haze of wine. His defiance cost him dearly. Soon he was dismissed, demoted, and banished to the frontier, relieved at last of his enforced duty. Perhaps this was the true intent of the decree, yet the favors showered upon the Zhang family remained impossible to ignore. Amid such extravagant and increasingly absurd indulgences, you began to sense a change in the brothers. Beneath the polish of poetry, music, and gentle smiles, their greed and ruthlessness slowly bled through. By the year 701, only 3 years after Prince Zetian, restored from exile, was named heir again, suspicion gnawed at the Empress Wu Zetian. She had already dethroned this son once, and though she grudgingly restored him as heir, the wound of treachery ran deep. She never truly trusted his submission. The older she grew, the heavier her doubts pressed upon her. But her grandchildren, the children of Zetian, were still too young to grasp their peril. To their eyes, their father's elevation meant a golden horizon, a future in which they would stand as prince and princess of a mighty realm. Carefree, naive, they sometimes echoed the whispered complaints of ministers who despised the Zhang brothers' arrogance, muttering about their pride and abuse of power. They never imagined that the palace was riddled with the brothers' spies, listening in every chamber. Their careless words soon reached the Zhang brothers. The brothers knew the Empress too well. They twisted the children's idle criticisms into charges of blasphemy, claims that the young prince and princess had cursed their grandmother, the sovereign herself. For an aging ruler, mistrustful and hypersensitive, especially toward rumors touching her private life, this was the spark against tinder. The Empress Wu Zetian's rage was swift and merciless. She ordered the execution of her 19-year-old grandson and her 17-year-old granddaughter. The court trembled. A chill swept the empire. The Zhang brothers had now demonstrated they could determine the fate of heirs apparent, the very bloodline of the dynasty. Through a whisper, they were no longer merely blades in the Empress's hand, cutting down her enemies. They had become something darker, 2 shadow emperors wielding the Empress Wu Zetian herself as the weapon of their ambition. You, caught as a bystander in the very eye of this storm of power, could smell the faint stench of destruction rising from that massacre which shook the empire. The Zhang brothers were step by step driving themselves toward a fatal abyss. They knew too well the parasitic nature of their existence. Everything they possessed flowed only from the Empress. They had no foundation in law, no support in institutions, no sanction of the people. Like bacteria clinging to a living host, they could thrive only so long as she endured. The moment the host perished, they too would vanish without a trace. This realization gnawed at them, filling their nights with dread. Facing enemies who also see their weakness, courtiers and princes who now despised them more openly. The brothers grew ever more hysterical. The small measure of prestige they had once gained by helping restore the crown prince was squandered by one reckless decision after another. The more ruthlessly they purged their opponents, the more they drove dissatisfied officials and the Li Tung clan into a single, united camp, a camp set wholly against them. Even as they reveled in the glittering palaces of the Empress Wu Zetian, indulging in the last feasts of her waning reign, you could almost hear the distant sound of shovels digging their graves. Historians have long debated the brothers' true role in the Empress's final years. Some records suggest that as her body weakened, the Empress entrusted the burdens of governance almost entirely to the Zhang brothers, making them in effect the handlers of the empire. Others insist she never surrendered the reins of power. She still made the decisions, while the brothers acted only as her secretaries and conduits, delivering her words when she lacked the strength to speak. Whatever the truth, one fact cannot be denied. The Zhang brothers had become the burning focal point of all the contradictions, resentments, and hostilities in the empire during its twilight under the Empress. You could feel the palace air grow heavier, tauter, oppressive, like the stifling stillness before a storm. In the court, two camps stood in stark opposition. On one side, the Zhang brothers symbolized the new order of inner favorites, men who rose not by merit, but by intimacy, personal favor, and tangled patronage. On the other side stood the traditional Confucian bureaucracy, grounded in rank, experience, and achievement. Once, the Empress Wu Zetian had nurtured both, playing one against the other to strengthen her empire. But now, with her age advancing and contradictions deepening, the balance had broken. A vast fissure had opened, waiting only for the right moment to collapse into ruin. Even you, a lowly servant on the sidelines, could not help but feel the rising undertow of fury swelling within the court. The two factions of ministers now opposed each other on almost every matter. The Zhang brothers seethed with hatred for the leading figure of the opposition, one of the Empress's senior chancellors, Wei Yuanzhang. Chancellor Wei, upright and unyielding, kept his sharp eyes fixed upon the brothers and their allies. At the slightest mistake, he would memorialize the Empress with a scathing indictment, toppling more than a few of their proteges from office. Although the Empress Wu Zetian herself, striving to maintain balance at court, never allowed the guilt of their allies to touch the brothers directly, the repeated blows still left them tense and restless. They knew, once the aging Empress passed away, a man of Chancellor Wei's character would be the first to rise against them, leading the reckoning that would drag them to ruin without a grave to rest in. So the Zhang brothers resorted again to their old weapon, taking advantage of their privilege as intimate favorites, allowed freely into the Empress's chambers, ever at her side in her frailty. They spun another web of deceit. This time they accused Chancellor Wei of conspiring with his followers to support the crown prince prematurely, of plotting to usurp the throne while the Empress still lived. To strengthen their false charge, they coerced and bribed some of Wei's subordinates into providing fabricated evidence. Once again, they sought to exploit the Empress's age and suspicion to eliminate a deadly foe. But this time, their scheme unraveled. Their evidence was weak, the chain of proof incomplete. Worse still, one of the coerced witnesses, pricked by conscience, recanted. And so, when the Zhang brothers stood before the court and the Empress to press their accusation, the lie collapsed before their eyes. Perhaps the Empress Wu Zetian still believed in them. Perhaps she, with her lifelong conviction that imperial stability outweighed all else, chose once more the principle, better to err in striking than to risk letting rebellion go free. Whatever her reasoning, though she did not order Chancellor Wei's death, as she had her own imperial grandchildren, she still chose to exile him to the far frontier. From a distance, you watched the venerable minister, who had labored half his life for the empire, whose very name was bound to integrity. He offered no further defense. Instead, with measured calm, he withdrew from the great hall. Each step was slow, respectful, yet carried the unbending strength of a man who refused to surrender his dignity. Instinctively, your eyes turned to the Empress. She sat in silence, her face unreadable, neither anger nor triumph, but also lacking the firmness you had come to expect. Her gaze never left the old minister's retreating figure, following him as he descended step by step, until at last his silhouette dissolved into the long expanse of the palace stairs. The Zhang brothers, it seemed, had won again. They had driven another formidable enemy from the court, and yet you saw no joy in their eyes. You looked closer at the officials surrounding them. The gazes turned upon the brothers no longer held mere contempt or disdain. In their depths now gleamed threads of hatred, hard and sharp. By striking down a man so respected, so universally admired, with such base trickery, the Zhang brothers had burned the last bridge. They had lost the heart of the bureaucracy. They had made themselves more isolated than ever before. Soon, you and everyone around you could feel it with unmistakable clarity. The once indomitable, tireless empress was truly growing old. You saw her less and less. Illness visited her often. Her body weakened day by day, and she spent most of her time secluded in her bedchamber, the hall of eternal life, rarely appearing in court. Even when she forced herself to attend an audience, she seemed drained, no longer radiating the overwhelming power that once shook mountains and rivers. That aura, which none dared meet with their eyes, was fading, little by little, because her health so often kept her from receiving officials directly. The Zhang brothers became her sole channel to the outside world. Every memorial had to pass through their hands before reaching the Empress, and every decree issued from her lips was carried outward only by them. As her strength waned, this monopoly on power made their authority swell at a feverish, unnatural pace. You felt they were like two mayflies clutching at the last rays of summer light, indulging in a strange, frenzied revel at the edge of collapse. They knew their patroness was already in countdown toward ruin, so they scrambled to harvest what they could in the little time left. They sold offices openly, accepted bribes, placed allies in every corner. Their residences glittered with a grandeur surpassing even that of princes. Their garments grew ever more ornate and elaborate. Their arrogance blazed higher than at any time before. The court itself slid into a dreadful paralysis. Officials no longer knew whom to obey. Should they listen to the chancellors, their words might never reach the Empress's ears. Should they listen to the Zhang brothers, who could know how much of what they conveyed was truly her will, and how much was their own? As for the nominal heir, Crown Prince Zetian, he walked on eggshells, bowing and flattering, terrified of offending the brothers, even by accident. Amid this stifling tension, you also noticed an unusual sight. More and more alchemists and sorcerers coming and going through the palace gates. You knew well, pursuit of immortality was a dream every emperor nursed, and the Empress was no different. Now, as her years drew short and her vitality ebbed away, that longing only sharpened. Under the Zhang brothers' recommendation, a swarm of these charlatans poured in, under the pretense of crafting elixirs of eternal life for the Empress. You watched them set up their furnaces, feeding them with strange ores and herbs, refining pellets of shimmering colors. They claimed these pills could restore the body and prolong years. But you overheard the palace's old physicians whispering in secret. Many of these so-called elixirs were laced with cinnabar, mercuric sulfide, and arsenic. Because these metals resisted decay, The ignorant alchemists believed their incorruptible nature could be transferred into those who ingested them. From today's eyes, it was a madness, a slow suicide. Yet in those times, countless nobles, obsessed with eternal life, swallowed them in full faith. Later archaeology revealed that many emperors of China indeed perished from such chronic poisoning. So, when you saw those jeweled boxes carried with reverence into the Empress's chamber, your heart filled with sorrow. This woman, who had ruled an empire for nearly half a century, at life's end could not escape the most human of fears, the fear of death. Her feverish pursuit of immortality, twined with the Zhang brothers' frantic, last-ditch scramble for power, wove together into a grotesque tableau, the twilight spectacle of an empire and the omen of the Empress's approaching end. As a mere palace maid, powerless to change anything, you could only keep watching, helpless, while one fatal mistake after another slowly forged the doom of the Empress's reign. The Zhang brothers, desperate to clutch power tighter, walled the frail Empress off ever more completely from the outside world. They believed that by controlling the sole passage to her, they controlled everything. But they did not see that in doing so, they severed every channel through which the Empress once touched reality. She became a lonely figure, trapped inside a cocoon of falsehoods. She could no longer hear her people as she once had. She could no longer know her realm as she once did. She could no longer grip the tangled threads of empire with the strength she once commanded. Her judgment faltered, her decisions blurred. She and her favorites together drifted into isolation, a gilded island, and beyond that island, in silence, a storm vast enough to sweep them all away was gathering. By the opening of the year 705, the Empress's illness deepened. For many days, she could not appear at court. The Zhang brothers stationed themselves at her bedside, never leaving, cutting her off entirely from the ministers outside. The court had not glimpsed their sovereign's face in months. A hush of panic spread among the bureaucracy. Their fear was not only of the brothers' present monopoly on power, but of the abyss that loomed ahead. What if the Empress had already died, and the Zhang brothers were sealing the news, ruling in her name to fatten their own fortunes? What if they planned to forge a false edict, disinheriting Crown Prince Zetian so they might seize the throne themselves? What if, before the court could stir, they struck first, poisoning the prince, silencing their foes, so that when the Empress finally departed this world, there would be no heir, no opposition, and the empire would fall into their hands as naturally as fruit into the lap. The empire stood on the brink of succession, yet filled with 1,000 rumors, 1,000 possible endings. And in that fevered atmosphere, to wait became the most dangerous choice of all. So the empire's highest ministers made their decision. They would not wait. They would strike before those cunning, dangerous brothers could. A plot of life and death quietly unfolded among the empire's most seasoned officials, men who had weathered the tides of court politics for a lifetime and witnessed every chapter of the empress's reign. The conspiracy was born in secret, conceived by several ministers of chancellor rank. Soon after, two generals, men of the sword, who despised the Zhang brothers with marrow-deep hatred, threw their weight behind it. With military power now secured, the faction finally persuaded Crown Prince Zetian to stand at the center of their plan, and with the rightful heir to the throne at its heart, the coup ceased to look like treason. It was no longer rebellion. It was a righteous act to cleanse the court of traitorous usurpers and restore the empire's order. Historians would later name it after the reign title of Zetian when he eventually ascended the throne, the Shenlong Restoration. When all was ready, on the night of February 20th, 705, the imperial city of Luoyang fell, as always, into deep silence and shadow. The darkened palace breathed only with the dim flicker of lanterns, swaying to the measured steps of patrolling attendants outside the quiet halls. You were among those on duty that night, lantern in hand, returning slowly to your quarters for rest. You did not know that by then the palace was already saturated with the scent of blood yet to be spilled. Within the walls, guards had long since been placed into silent readiness under the crown prince's allies. Beyond the walls, formations of armored soldiers, arrayed in ranks and bristling with blades, had encircled the entire palace under cover of night, dragging your tired body. You were just about to change shift when it began. First, hurried footfalls breaking the stillness, then the sharp clatter of weapons, and soon muffled cries, cut short as quickly as they rose. You understood at once. Something had gone terribly wrong. Led by the Crown Prince's faction, 500 of the Imperial Guards, the most elite soldiers of the palace, charged under the veil of night straight through the palace's gate, cutting a bloody path toward their single destination, the Longevity Hall, Her Majesty's residence. Hiding in the shadow of a colonnade, you watched squads of steel-armed men rush past. Their blades glinted faintly in lantern light. Their steps pounded like drums of war. Eunuchs and maids on night watch scattered in panic. Screams and sobs pierced the air. The palace, moments ago, a silent dream, erupted into a clamorous, blood-soaked battlefield. The soldiers struck first at the courtroom of where the Zhang brothers lodged. Dragged from their beds, half asleep, the brothers had no time even to gather themselves before they were seized by rough, furious hands and hauled into the courtyard. You dared not approach, only listening from afar as the house was surrounded. At first, you heard the brothers' desperate cries, then sharper, briefer. Their screams, choked and silenced almost as soon as they escape their throats. Later, you learn the truth. Under the eaves of the Longevity Hall itself, in the 5 corridors, the Zhang brothers were beheaded on the spot by soldiers who had long hated them to the bone. Their other kin, discovered in the chaos, were dragged out one by one and put to the sword in the same way. After those few brief, terrible shrieks, the palace began to settle once more into eerie quiet. What remained was the steady tramp of boots, receding into the night. In that single, decisive moment, the Function Bureau, once a glittering, decadent heart of power, was annihilated, reduced to ashes of memory. The 2 brothers, once adorned in brocade, painted faces like blossoms, had come to their end in a blaze of steel and blood. Their short, flamboyant lives were finished, not in splendor, but in ruin. On the first sunrise, after the Shenlong restoration, the severed heads of the Zhang brothers were hoisted high upon the Tianjin Bridge at the southern gate of Luoyang. They remained there for 3 days as a grim spectacle. It was the victor's way of proclaiming to the world the age of the Zhang brothers was finished, utterly and forever. From afar, you watched the soldiers, their blades still dripping with blood, as they escorted the crown prince and the senior ministers who had supported him, marching toward the empress's bedchamber. You held your breath, knowing that the most decisive, most perilous moment was about to unfold. The chronicles record that this woman, who had weathered more storms than perhaps any other in China's history, looked upon the armed men who burst into her chamber without uttering a word. With the trembling support of her eunuchs, she pushed herself slowly upright from her sickbed. Her gaze was cold, unblinking. She fixed it first upon the ministers, men who had once bowed to her every command, and then upon her son, the Crown Prince Zetian, his face pale as paper, hiding behind them, still unable to meet the eyes of the mother he had always feared. The Empress, sharp as ever, had likely divined what had happened and what was yet to come long before the echo of armored boots filled her palace. The ministers, cloaked in their righteousness, poured out their carefully prepared explanations. They insisted this was no rebellion. They claimed they feared the Zhang brothers' treachery. They declared they had acted only to safeguard the realm, to protect the dynasty from ruin. On and on they spoke, layering excuse upon excuse. The Empress listened in silence. Her face betrayed nothing. She waited. Only when their torrent of justifications had ended did they reveal their true demand that the ailing Empress, for the sake of the empire's stability, must immediately relinquish the throne to the Crown Prince. You were not there inside the chamber, yet you could almost feel the suffocating weight of that moment. as though the air itself had frozen solid. The chronicles say the empress remained silent for a long, long time. Two sides stood locked in stillness, the chamber as tense as a drawn bowstring. At last, her eyes swept slowly over the men before her, those ministers who once groveled at her feet, and that son whom she had once banished in disgrace. She knew the truth. Her time was over. Finally, she agreed. She would yield the throne. On the second day of the Shenlong restoration, an edict was proclaimed. The Empress Wu Zetian abdicated in favor of the Crown Prince Li Xian, who immediately ascended the throne as the new emperor. On the third day, the new emperor Li Xian led the assembled court in granting his mother a lofty yet hollow honorific, Emperor, the divine and sacred. It preserved her final dignity, a title still styled as emperor, but it was only a name, and thus the era of the only empress regnant in all of Chinese history, the woman who had ruled as sovereign for 15 tumultuous years, was sealed into the annals of time, never to return, forever flowing into the unyielding river of history. After the storm, silence descended, a silence so deep it felt like death itself. The palace you knew so well seemed unchanged, and yet overnight everything had been overturned. The Zhang brothers, gone, beheaded. The courtiers, favorites, and confidants who once clustered about the empress, dead, exiled, or stripped of rank. The court itself reshaped with dizzying speed, replaced by the new favorites and power brokers who had led the Shenlong restoration. And she, the woman who once bent the entire empire to her will, was now, well, shall we say, respectfully relocated to another palace, Shenyang Palace. You had, of course, heard of Shangyang before, from the days when the empress was still a consort. It had always carried the whispered reputation of a cold palace. Unlike the decaying, filthy prisons of other dynasties, this one was still well kept, grand even in its ornamentation, but its purpose was the same: to house the discarded, the elderly, the fallen consorts, a gilded cage, a place to wait out the years in splendid isolation. Once, the Empress Wu Zetian herself had sent rivals here, countless defeated consorts, women who had stood in her way on her climb to the throne, left here to die in despair and solitude. Now at last, it was her turn, with nothing left but the hollow honorific, Emperor of the divine and sacred, a handful of eunuchs and maids to serve her daily needs. She withdrew from the stage of history. In the days that followed, as the aftershocks of the dynastic shift slowly settled, her son, the new emperor Li Xian, led the full retinue of court officials to Shengyang Palace to offer his greetings. From afar, you watched that vast procession, your heart weighed down with unspeakable emotions. The son who had once been dismissed like a pawn now strode forward in the resplendent golden robe of the dragon, the ruler of all under heaven. And among the officials at his back were not a few who had once sworn their loyalty to the Empress. Now they came as victors to pay a visit to their fallen sovereign, a son gazing upon the mother who had once cast him aside, a mother meeting the eyes of the son who had helped unseat her. Between ruler and subject, between mother and child, all the tangled knots of ambition, betrayal, affection, and resentment were compressed into a single cup of tea, offered with ceremonious reverence. The chronicles record that when the new emperor and his ministers beheld the empress frail upon her sick bed, they bowed deeply and then wept. But how much of those tears were genuine grief, and how much carefully staged performance? How much of this account was shaped by the victors themselves, eager to paint a tableau of filial piety, of orderly succession and harmonious peace? What was the true air of that room? Awkward tension, muted resentment, or sincere release and gratitude? No one will ever know. You only know this: from that day forward, the Empress's body withered with visible speed. Perhaps it was illness, but you cannot help but believe that for a woman who had lived and breathed power, it was the fall itself, the crushing descent from the very summit of authority, that finally broke her spirit and consumed her soul. In the winter of the year 705, 8 months after the Shillong Restoration, the former Empress Wu Zetian, in the quiet seclusion of Shengyang Palace's Hall of Immortal Residence, breathed her last. She was 82 years old. Before her death, she issued a final decree that she be enshrined in the Tang ancestral temple, buried beside her husband, Emperor Gaozong, and that her titles be stripped of imperial rank, to be remembered instead as Empress Consort Wu Zetian, the divine and sacred. In this, she renounced the empty style of emperor and chose to return in death as the wife of the man who had once, against all voices of protest, brought her back from the monastery and loved her, trusted her, and raised her up. No explanation was given, and so for posterity, the gesture remains an enigma. Was it her final surrender to the world of men, a last tender memory of her husband, a mother's pragmatic gift to her son and to the stability of the tongue, or a calculated compromise to secure peace for her own legacy? Whatever the truth, her death marked the definitive end of one of the most singular eras in Chinese history. And the irony, those who had opposed her in life, those who had torn her down in illness, did not find peace in her absence. Very soon, they too fell into new struggles for power. Most met grim and violent ends. The game of power did not end with her. It simply found new players. And so, at last, let us step away from that palace of intrigue and blood and turn instead to a place larger, more eternal. In the haze of a drifting dream, you find yourself standing upon Mount Liang, northwest of Shangan. Here lies Qianling, the most unique of all imperial tombs in Chinese history. It is unique because within this vast necropolis rest two sovereigns together, Emperor Gaozong of Tang, Li Ji, and his consort, who later claimed the throne in her own right, the Empress Wu Zetian. You walk slowly along the Great Spirit Way, a broad avenue stretching toward the burial mound. On either side rise stone figures, massive statues of warriors and officials, horses and guardians, silent sentinels carved from stone. They have stood for over 1,000 years, witnesses to the empire's rise and decline. Most striking of all are the 61 life-sized effigies. They are known as the 61 foreign envoys, representing the chieftains and emissaries of distant lands, who once came to pay tribute at the Tang court, and who gathered in Chang'an to mourn Emperor Gaozong. They stand now in eternal silence, testament to the Tang Dynasty's brilliance at its zenith, when all nations turned their eyes toward China, and that glory, it was not his alone, it was also hers. The Empress Wu Zetian had been part of building that grandeur, part of pushing the empire to its peak. Passing through this forest of stone, you finally reach the front of the tomb. Here, two monumental stelae stand opposite one another. To the west rises the stele in praise of the sacred deeds, its surface carved with over 7,000 dense characters. The Empress Wu Zetian herself composed those words, an exhaustive eulogy of her husband's civil and martial accomplishments. But to the east, there stands another, and it is here that your journey and our story finds its end. A stele called the Tablet Without Words. You stand before it, dwarfed by its immensity, struck by its vast blankness. It towers over 7.5 meters high, over 2 meters wide, a massive block of nearly 100 tons, its surface framed with exquisite carvings of giants and phoenixes. And yet, while its twin across the way is crammed with words, this one is silent, smooth, empty, not a single character inscribed. For centuries, emperors of China inscribed their own stelae with countless words, striving to immortalize their deeds, to broadcast their glory to the ages. And yet she, the only woman ever to bear the title of emperor in China's long history, left her stele bare, a blankness more startling, more incomprehensible than any words. Why did the Empress do this? For more than 1,000 years, people have argued endlessly, and four main interpretations have taken shape. The first says her merit was too great to be contained in words. Those who hold this view believe the Empress Wu Zetian thought her lifetime of achievements far surpassed any ruler before her. A single stele could never carry the weight of her greatness. Any attempt to put her deeds into writing would pale against the scale of her empire. Thus, she left the stone blank, so that heaven and earth themselves might inscribe her legacy, so that history itself might judge her. It was the act of ultimate confidence, ultimate pride. The second view is the opposite. Her sins were too heavy for words. This view imagines that in her final years, the Empress Wu Zetian felt some flicker of remorse for the ruthless purges, the slaughter of Li Tung clan, the clan of her two husbands, the blood-soaked climb to absolute power. She knew she was a figure of fierce controversy, that her balance of virtue and vice could never be clearly fixed. Better to leave the stone unmarked than to inscribe praises that would be smeared, or condemnations that would be spat upon for eternity. In silence, she allowed the world to speak for her, a strange mix of resignation, guilt, and quiet acceptance. The third explanation is sharper, more pragmatic, and reveals her political wisdom even in death. The Empress Wu Zetian knew that history would be written by her enemies, by Confucian scholars who despised her. Had she carved her own self-glorification into stone, the rulers to follow, especially those who loathed her, would surely have ordered the words chiseled away, perhaps even replaced with words of scorn. So she chose not to give them the chance. By inscribing nothing, she denied them their weapon. This, too, was a subtle defense, a retreat that became the highest form of advance. The fourth explanation is the most haunting, the one many prefer to believe, her final challenge to the future. It is said that in her last edict, she declared, "My merits and my faults shall be judged by later generations." The blank stele, then, was her question flung across time. How will you judge me? She seemed to know that history itself is not fixed, that the image of her would rise and fall with each passing age. She refused to let the story end with a carved conclusion. Instead, she left the final judgment to us all. And I believe this tablet, without words, may have come from something even deeper, even lonelier. Perhaps this woman who had wrestled all her life against men, against heaven, against order, against tradition, at the very edge of life, realized that everything she had spent her strength to command and to change was only circling back to its beginning. Her entire life had been a wondrous, dazzling dream, but dreams you dissolve into nothingness. Perhaps in her old age, she too grew confused. What, after all, had she been chasing? She was tired, so very tired. No longer did she care to proclaim her legitimacy, her power, her deeds. No longer did she care for how future generations would debate her name. Perhaps, in the end, she simply wanted to leave behind all the struggles, the battles, the ambitions, the burdens. Perhaps she simply wanted to depart from this dream of nothingness, as empty-handed as she had once entered it. You stand before this stele, weathered by 1,000 years of wind and rain, and it feels as though you can see the shadows of countless generations pausing here, gazing, pondering, falling into silence. This stone stands like the very reflection of the Empress Zetian herself, her image in history, layered and obscured, painted over by prejudice, invention, and fear. Her true face, brilliant, flawed, human, has long been hidden. She has become a symbol, a cipher, a mirror. Every age casts its own reflection upon her story, its beliefs about power, about ambition, about women. Was she a wise and far-sighted sovereign, or a ruthless despot? Was she a trailblazing woman who shattered the chains of her time, or merely a tragic figure consumed and deformed by power? Perhaps the answer lies here, in this tablet without words. It is silent, yet it speaks of everything. It invites us to write upon it and warns us at the same time that whatever we inscribe will reveal less about her and more about ourselves. Now the night deepens. Let us leave these heavy riddles to this silent stone. The dusk settles like gentle ink, washing over the curved eaves of palaces, over the ancient city walls, the stories that once shook the earth, the swagger of Shui Huayi, the delicate beauty of the Zhang brothers, the magnificence of the Silk Road, the splendor of Luoyang, the majesty of the Tang Dynasty, and above all, the lonely and indomitable Empress herself, all begin to fade in your mind. They soften, blur, as though viewed through the thin veil of a dream. You can almost still catch the faint scent of incense in the air, still hear the rustle of silk sleeves, still see lantern light trembling upon polished floors, but all of it drifts farther and farther away, quiet, distant, serene. You no longer need to ask what words should be carved in that empty stone. You no longer need to judge who was right, who was wrong, in that hidden palace of love and betrayal. The answers no longer matter, not anymore. Now, you are only a weary traveler, pausing for a brief moment by the banks of the history's endless river. It is time to move on. to continue your own journey, to step into a deeper, more peaceful dream. Let your thoughts scatter like reflections upon water, dispersing, dissolving, returning to the stillness of night. Sleep well, and may the silence of the tablet, without words, keep watch over your dreams.